I'm the moderator for this session, and I want to welcome our panelists and the attendees for making time to attend this webinar. As we all know, rape and sexual violence is a pandemic in our country. And we see the perpetrators coming from different social classes. Now, over the past years, and even during this pandemic, the lockdown, and over the past few weeks, we've seen a number of actions, interventions taken by civil society and the police and government agencies, to curb this menace. The Child Rights Act has been passed. So many states have signed on. We have about 13 or 14 states signed on to the VAP Act, this Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. A state of emergency, has been declared on rape. We've seen the National Assembly passing steep penalties for sexual abuse in our institutions of learning, and psychosocial support is being given to victims. Shelters have been set up, and so on and so forth. So there's all that is going on. And we have seen that perpetrators, some are religious people. Some of the incidents are happening in religious places. We're having children dead, found dead in abandoned places, in mosques, in churches. So we think that it's very important for us to have this conversation and look at, well, in the civic world, we can see a lot of actions being taken. Now, what about our faith communities and our religious organizations and our religious leaders? What should be their response? Seeing that the matter we are dealing with, it's something that should be of grave concern, given the priorities that our religions place on human life and bodily integrity. So this is a very important conversation that we think we should have, to look beyond the issues or the complaining or even these measures that are being taken to respond, and to think of what are the proactive things that we can do, religious leaders can do, to prevent what we are dealing with. And that is why we have focused this webinar on how to end it. It's not enough to be responding to the incidents as they are coming. There has to be also an attack on how to make sure that these problems don't keep coming up, and then we keep trying to catch up and call for access to justice and so on. So to lead us in this conversation today, we have two lead speakers, Reverend Father George Ehusani, who is the Executive Director of Lux Terra Foundation. We have Sheikh Nuruddeen Lemu, the Director of Islamic Trust Education. They will be speaking for 15 minutes each. Then we have two discussants. Dr. Chichi Aniagolu-Okoye is the Country Director of Technoserve, and Mr. Omagbitse Barrow is the CEO of Learning Impact NG. Now, these speakers, we can always go online and look at who they are, but there's something they have in common. It's not about, the things they've achieved or the positions they hold. These are people who are leaders and are very committed to the cause of social justice and interfaith collaboration as well. And they have set up organizations and led organizations and initiatives, to make sure that there's social justice in the society. Now, before I call the speakers, I will just talk about how we are going to manage this session. The host, of course, is muting all mics and all videos are turned off. We are encouraging people to send their questions to the Q&A box. So if we have any questions for any of the speakers, we'll send those to the Q&A box, and please specify who among the speakers that question is directed to make it easy for us to to proceed. We will take a few comments also, but it will just be 2 minutes and just a few people. We are not going to have time to accommodate all the questions, so I apologize ahead of time because we have hundreds of people that have registered, for this, and we won't be able to take everybody, but we do as much as we can. So welcome again to this webinar. Now I will call on our first speaker, Reverend Father George Ehusani, to take the.
Father George, we can't hear you. You are muted. You have to unmute.
Great. Thank you, everyone who is online now. Particularly, I want to thank our collaborators, the Community Life Project, Ngozi Iwere and her companions, her colleagues. I want to thank my colleagues on the panel, Sheikh Nuruddeen Lemu, Chichi Aniagolu-Okoye, Omagbitse Barrow. The issue of the embarrassing upsurge in rape is something that should concern all of us and give us perhaps sleepless nights as to what must we do to bring this plague, this pestilence to an end, to reduce drastically this pestilence. It is true that we have always had, human history has always had incidences of rape, but they were few and far between and considered an abomination. Rape has always belonged to those crimes that are considered abominable, meaning that we shouldn't hear of it. And perhaps that is part of the reason why there was the regime of silence. Thank God that today, the social media has helped so that people are now more able to speak out about rape. Victims are able to come out to say that they have been raped. Neighbors are able to report. But the long history of rape, and perhaps what is behind the silence, the regime of silence, is that it is such a heinous crime. It is such an abominable crime that families would not want to hear that any of their people it has this scourge, this disease, this ailment, this accursed behavior. Now, what we have seen in the last few years in our country is that there is an upsurge. There appears to be an upsurge. And then, like Ngozi said in her introduction, from high-level people to low-level people, we are hearing of big executives raping their house girls, raping their staff. We are hearing of teachers, professors raping their students. Unfortunately, we have even heard occasionally of pastors and priests raping members. This is abominable. This is perverse. This should not be heard of. But unfortunately, we now need to talk about it and do whatever we must to bring it to an end. In the last 2 weeks, the Archbishop of Abuja issued a statement where he described rape as some of the most heinous crimes in life, and that rape inflicts, I quote, rape inflicts lifelong, untold psychological trauma on the victim. It is not only a grievous, sinful act, but also a very barbaric and criminal act, unquote. This is how Archbishop Ignatius Kaigama of Abuja describes it. He says, "We hope that the perpetrators of such heinous crimes will face the full wrath of the law, and hopefully they will be reformed and delivered of the bad spirit that leads them to commit such horrible crimes," said Archbishop Kaigama. The same week, 29th of June, Archbishop of Lagos, Alfred Martins, also issued a statement of condemnation against rape. He says, rape is not only a serious crime against the victim, it is also a gross violation of the sacredness of the person's body and an affront on the Almighty God. The Almighty God in whose image and likeness we have all been created. As we read in the book of Genesis, we are all created, we say, in the image of God, in his image and likeness, and God created us as good. Because of that creation in God's image, we Christians believe Our bodies are sacred. And St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, the letter to the 1 Corinthians, he says, don't you know that you are temples of the Holy Spirit? So your bodies are sacred and may not be violated, must not be violated. So Archbishop Alfred Martins says that such persons clearly have gone outside rational human behavior. And I would next say that there are elements in our society that render or facilitate this kind of behavior. And I would like us to quickly see it before I talk about what the religious bodies should do. We have a long history of it, the human propensity in general to abuse all forms of power. Those who rape others are people who believe that they have some power over those they rape. So the propensity to abuse power, any kind of power, a religious leader having power over members of his or her congregation, a teacher having power over a student, an employer having power over an employee or potential employee, a father having power over a child, an uncle having power over a small child. So the propensity of human beings to abuse power is one factor that we need to take into consideration. This is why societies make laws and have laws and regulations to regulate the use of that power, the exercise of such power, in order to protect the weak against the strong and the powerful. Two, we have a long history of male chauvinism or primitive patriarchy, and what some have come to call the abuse of male privilege, by which the female folk were often seen simply as objects to be possessed and treated as he wishes by the male folk, as if the female has a lesser dignity and honor than her male folk. And in the best case scenario, the people just think that women or female children are lesser, and that the male child is more honorable, which is a lie, which is unacceptable, and our Christian religion rejects that outright. People treat their wives as if they possess their wives. I'm one of those who has been campaigning that, look, we need to do something about this bride price, especially bride price by which people pay big money to marry and now begin to behave as if they actually bought the woman. Next is, there is a bloodline or a terrible confusion between sexual attraction and sexual satisfaction. Sexual attraction as such can be innocent and natural, but between sexual attraction and sexual assault, there is a big chasm. Now, as human beings, we can experience sexual attraction and it is innocent. Then we need, when children are growing up, particularly in families, they need to be taught what is called deferred gratification. They need to be taught about how to handle their impulses, their desires, to make sure that they don't behave like animals. Their desires need to be subjected to rationality, to reasoning. So when that line between sexual attraction and sexual satisfaction is blurred or confused, then we run into serious problems, as we are seeing now. The mosques, the churches, religious organizations, schools, we must all be up and doing in teaching people the difference between sexual attraction and sexual satisfaction. There has not been sufficient training in sexuality, not just sex education, but training in how to manage our sexual reproductive powers. There needs to be a lot more work in our churches. There needs to be a lot more work in our mosques to train people to handle and use to the glory of God the wonderful power to procreate that God has given us in our sexuality. That one, we need to develop curricula. We need to develop teaching aids to help from elementary school, from nursery school to the university. There needs to be, the General Studies Department of universities need to put in a lot of training, because these are teenagers and people who have just gone through puberty to train them on their sexuality and how to handle the difference between sexual attraction and sexual satisfaction. Now, then there is the terrible scourge in our day of the objectification of the female body. We have turned the female body to an object for entertainment. We have turned the female body to an object to sell products. You see all kinds of advertisements, and they are using the female body. You are using this female body to sell toothpaste, female body to sell a bottle of wine, female body to sell a car. I want to call on all those who are involved in this, all the agencies and all agencies of government and civil society agents and religious bodies to get into serious advocacy to stop using the female body as an object for pleasure, for the man's pleasure and for entertainment. The dignity and sacredness of the human or the female body must be constantly rejected. And these advertisements, a lot of the advertisements violate that sacredness and dignity of the female body. Then the emptiness in our public square today. Today, our public square appears empty, meaning naked of values. What we are seeing today with rape cannot be taken in isolation. It has to be taken in union with what we see with corruption, where somebody is a governor today, the next day he is paraded or he is charged to court for monumental corruption. That's not good for the psyche of young people. Today, somebody is a governor. I remember, I mean, it's very bad. This thing has a long history. During the military rule in this country, there are cases of secondary school girls being sent when a governor is visiting a town. Secondary school girls being sent as call girls, like prostitutes, to satisfy the terrible sexual perversion of the leaders, of the governor and his entourage. That happened during the military rule in this country. And I know that similar things are still happening, perhaps not as openly. So there is emptiness in our public square. Morals have gone, values have gone, and what we have is, with our young people particularly, what we have is sheep without shepherd. This is where the religious bodies need to come in big time. We are the ones who pride ourselves in being the teachers of values, the teachers of morals. We say that that is our territory. No one can do it better than us because our religious books, the Quran, the Bible, and the various regulations of our, none of them encourages any perverse sexual behavior. In fact, if you look at Christianity, it has the most puritanical laws and regulations. Jesus Christ says that to even look at somebody lustfully, no action, but to think in your mind lustfully, is already, you're already committing adultery in your heart. He says, you are told in Exodus chapter 20, you are told that you shall not commit adultery, the 6th commandment. But he says, I tell you, anyone who looks at another person, at a woman, or this, in our case today, both men and women, lustfully, such a person has already committed adultery in his or her heart. Now, this is very serious. And St. Paul says, our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit that may not be violated. So there is no question that our Christian religion has very strict legislation, very strict moral precepts with regards to our behavior in sexuality. Christians permit sex only within marriage, within properly constituted marriage, and nowhere else. So where people can be going to church and be engaged in sex outside marriage, that is horrible already, not to talk of violent behavior in sex. That one is crazy and must be dealt with as a social pathology. Christianity will repudiate that in the harshest terms. Now, there is a high degree of social pathology in Nigeria, meaning that many people are sick. All the stories I have been hearing this year about rape, they demonstrate to me that we are not dealing with healthy people. We are dealing with sick minds. A lot of the, perhaps most of those who are guilty of this sexual perversion in our society today, perhaps needs to be in the asylum. They need to be locked away. because people who have a bit of reasoning cannot do the kind of things that we see and we hear that they are doing. I mean, how can a 20-year-old person, a 50-year-old person go and lie down with a 10-year-old? If that happens, then that means there is something that has not developed properly in the brain, or definitely the person needs psychiatric attention. The person needs to be locked away in an asylum with psychiatrists taking care, or clinical psychologists taking care of the person. In our society, we have not given sufficient consideration for mental health. And these are part of the things we are harvesting. We are harvesting these crimes, these heinous crimes, because we have not given sufficient attention to mental health in our society. I insist that a lot of these cases we are hearing are psychiatric cases that need psychiatric attention. And we cannot take that in isolation from the other misbehaviors in our society. Look at the way our people drive. Look at the way people behave like hooligans all over the place. So these are evidences that we do have a major psychosocial problem that need to be addressed. Then there is the resurgence of primitive superstition. We say we are Christians. So many of us say we are Christians. Half of the population of Nigeria say we are Christians. But there is a resurgence. There is more superstition in Nigeria today than when I was born 62 years ago. People are, I'm told that people are sleeping with children in order to make them rich. That people are sleeping with children, call such people Christians or Muslims. We need to say clearly, we need to dissociate ourselves from such people. And if we name them and shame them, because this cannot be associated with Christianity in any way. So what we are seeing today is a resurgence, a revival of primitive superstition that will make somebody, I mean, I have heard of people taking somebody to the graveyard to sleep in order to get something. Now, what we're talking about is that we have numerous people in our churches, but perhaps we who are leaders, pastors and imams, have often failed in our teaching, in our catechesis, in our education. And we need to constantly reinvent ourselves, reinvent our methods. And if we find, you know, that we are not succeeding using particular methods, then we need to change our methods. Now, finally, I would like to say that religious leaders need to play leading roles in collaboration with the agencies, the civil society agencies. I have to commend the We Are Tired group, the various agencies that took part in We Are Tired. NAPKIP and all other agencies, we need to congratulate them for the work they are doing. We are supposed to be in the forefront, religious leaders. We are because this is an affront on a society that says is Christian, a society that says is Muslim. It's an affront. We need to take the leadership and lead people back to God, as it were. Because what we are seeing is the loss of the sense of the sacred, loss of the sense of God, loss of the fear of God. That's what we are seeing exhibited in these terrible incidents that we are having. We need to advocate for a major change in the way we look at rape and how we treat offenders and how we treat the unfortunate victims. Never should the victim have the impression that she has done something shameful. The victim is always a victim and should be treated with compassion, with all sense of sympathy, and society should come together to help the person. A person who is raped is never guilty of the offense. So a situation where rape victims are too ashamed to come out because of the stigmatization of the society, we religious leaders should do a lot, should do everything within our power to disabuse society of that kind of idea and celebrate any rape victim that is able to come out, celebrate him or her, and then protect him or her, send him or her to rehabilitation, for some kind of psychological rehabilitation, so support the person in whatever way, even when the case of rape has not yet been fully proved. Because for somebody to come out to say, I am raped, there's a problem. And such problem needs to be addressed, whether we are able to prove it or not, the allegation or not. Then,
Father,
so
I'm going to interject a bit, Father, because of time. I'm going to interject a bit. You have a few minutes to round up,
Good. So I'll round up in 2 minutes. Now, improve our legal system. Today's legal system, judicial system in Nigeria is not adequate to be able to deal with these problems. The police, for example, I mean, people are raped and they go to the police and the police start asking, what were you wearing? What time of the day was it? What were you wearing? You are the cause. You called it for it. Now we need to educate the police. A lot of our police are not sensitive to these issues, especially when it comes to the female sex. They are not sensitive because they themselves are often male chauvinists. We perhaps need to set up units within the police, units that are specialized in this, that are trained to handle rape cases, not just anybody on the counter. We need to equip such a unit, support such a unit. Religious bodies need to support such units within the police and work with them when there's any report, because often the rape victim goes to the pastor or goes to the priest or goes to the imam to report. If that happens, then we should be the ones to help to make sure that the law works perfectly. Next is that we need, while admonishing Christians and Muslims to be modest in their dress, preachers should stop giving any excuse for rape. Nigerians should stop excusing the rape perpetrator by saying that the rape victim did not dress properly. Yes, we will encourage modesty. We keep preaching modesty, but no one who is a victim of rape is ever the guilty one. It is the one who could not control his or her impulses that is guilty. So we should stop saying, oh, the reason why this rape happened is because somebody was not well dressed. Next, finally, we need to constantly teach our people deferred gratification. What we see in the social media, look at Hush Puppy, Woodberry, e-money, all this, today is instant gratification. Now, instant gratification in money, but also the spirit of instant gratification can easily go to sexual perversion, where you are attracted and you cannot hold yourself. So if you cannot hold yourself and you must express your desire, your sexual desire, you must satisfy it instantly, then it means you have not learned self-control. And we Christians are told, Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 to 23, lists the fruits of the spirit, and self-control is key. So we need to teach self-control, deferred gratification, self-mastery, and that should begin from the family. When I want to end by saying, when people say, oh, church, Mosque, what are you doing? I say, what are you doing as fathers and mothers? Because developmental psychology says by the time a child is 5 years, that child has already been destroyed or been made. So families need to do a lot of work in order that their children will grow to be more humane, more human, more compassionate, and more sensible. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Father. Thank you so much. Thank you for this very incisive presentation that you have made. I'm going to call on Sheikh Nuruddeen now to give us his presentation.
So, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, may the peace and blessings of God be on Prophet Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, Abraham, all of his prophets, and all of good people from history right until the day of judgment. I thank the organizers for this opportunity and pray that this would be, when we talk about the role of religious leaders, that this is one of those opportunities and roles that religious leaders are able to play with others who really want to see the world becoming a better place in a more significant way. I'd like to thank the organizers also for this opportunity, and I'd like to start with a few basics just to broaden the basis of our discussion. Classical rape is a woman being raped by some stranger, and that is definitely rape, and it is terrible. However, I think it is probably more useful we look at rape from its broadest definition, or at least a much broader definition. Rape is the sexual assault of a woman by a man, of a man by a woman, of a man by a man, of a woman by a woman. It is coercive sexual exploitation. And it usually would start with some form of sexual harassment. Remember, most sexual assaults, most cases of rape are actually done 90%. 90% are not done by a stranger. So this is something that unfortunately is not the kind that let's just get more CCTVs here and there. A significant amount of rape, depending on the society, between 30 to 60% of cases of rape are actually domestic. They are done in the home. It's a girl being raped by a cousin or an uncle or something like that. So it's much more sinister. It's much more pervasive. What is the wrong done by rape? Rape is one of those really terrible crimes against a person's dignity, against a person's body. It's a violent crime. And just for the sake of comparison, if you would forgive me, a woman would rather have a man rob her of her property, that an armed robber came and stole whatever they wanted in the house, than to rape them. So we are talking about a crime that is worse than armed robbery, if you are to look at it from the side of the victim. Consequently, most religions, most societies have given rape a really significant punishment. The worst punishment they could think of would be considered the most appropriate. Death sentence in some societies, life imprisonment in others. From the Islamic perspective, rape is an assault upon what is called the maqasid of Sharia, the objectives of the Islamic way of life. It's an assault against dignity. It's an assault against the body. It's an assault against the mind. It's an assault against people's choice of free will. It's an assault against the family. It's an assault against property and the future of the person when you look at the trauma, the psychological trauma that usually comes after it. It is very asymptomatic. It's not seen. It is the most unreported violent crime. And unfortunately, in Nigeria, from all the studies I have been able to see, only about 5% of rape cases are actually reported. And so while it is important to have punishments that deter, to have a better legal system for handling the 5% cases, actually of the 5% cases, only about 3.5% even get to the police. So this is a really, really terrible problem. And as Father George put it, we have police that have not been trained to handle this problem properly. We have parents that as soon as they see their child has been raped, go and wash yourself, actually wash off the evidence. Unintendedly, people have not been trained in how best to handle this problem. And so definitely we need better management of, I don't like to use the word victim, but I think that's common because, when somebody has cancer, we describe the person as a cancer survivor, not a cancer victim. We look at the strength of the person to move forward, not somebody that has been locked down by something like cancer. And I think the same thing we would probably look at as on the side of rape, that a rape survivor is a survivor, not a victim. To start using language that allows us to remove the stigma even around the language we use on those who are survivors, in the legal sense, of course, victims of rape. It is very prevalent. From a number of surveys, about 2.7% of male population have been involved in rape. This is studies on university campuses. So you're looking at nearly 3 out of every 100 men. That is terrible. And 1.1% of women have been involved in raping somebody else. So it is really a very terrible, very pervasive, very underreported offense of all violent crimes. As we've said, rape is the most underreported. In Islamic jurisprudence, scholars have often given prescribed very severe punishments. For some, they consider 100 lashes. Others consider death sentence. Others decide to leave it to the judge to decide what is the most appropriate. But many use the analogy with robbery, that this is robbing a woman violently of her chastity and honor, and therefore it is worse than armed robbery and should therefore be given a greater punishment than armed robbery. Just as armed robbery creates insecurity on the roads, so does rape create insecurity in society. So it's not viewed actually, therefore, by some scholars as an offense against the individual, where the individual says, I forgive. The moment it has come to court and the court realizes, so it's not like somebody insulted me, I've decided to withdraw the case from court. Because it's a crime against society, it is out of the hands of the survivor or the victim of the offense. And so it is treated with utmost seriousness. The other thing, and Father George alluded to this, which we find in many religious traditions, the kind of metaphors that religious jurists use for marriage. Some look at marriage as being like a very material transaction, and they look at it as buying and selling. In other words, as Father George alluded to, the marital gift is actually interpreted by some as a bride price. And even though some may change the name, in their heads, they are looking at it as having bought sexual rights. This is an abominable way of looking at marriage. When we look at the metaphors used for marriage in the Quran, it is one of partnership, not sale. So even if you are going to bring it down to a materialistic level, and marriage is far more sacred than a business contract. But even if, for the sake of argument, you wanted to say, so what kind of a transaction are we looking at in a marriage? It is more like a partnership than a sale agreement. Why? Because just as the man has sexual rights, the woman has sexual rights. But in that sexual right understanding, forced sex was not understood. And just as there's the understanding that you use each other's properties, you can live in my house and I can eat your cooking and this and that, there's no understanding of forced ownership. You don't say because we are married, we don't recognize theft. We don't recognize stealing. Just because a murder takes place within the family doesn't mean it's no more murder. Because a son stole property that, yes, he probably has some right to inherit in the distant future, that he has some right to it, in no way makes it no more a case of theft. And the same thing in marriage. Forced sexual act, while some do not want to recognize marital rape, is still rape. Just as you can have theft and murder within the family, it's still theft, it's still murder. Marital rape is still an insult on the dignity and the body of the woman. And this is very common in some cultures, especially in those contexts where you have problems to do with pornography. And this is becoming a problem on the rise, another pandemic. That sexual relations, and if you consult with people in the area of family therapy or marital counseling, we have a serious rise in sexual dissatisfaction as men become addicted to pornography and try to turn something that would be considered traditionally as love making. That you are actually improving the quality of love between the marital couple, you actually find rape as something that is destroying love, and pornography playing a major role there. Not just pornography, but also the combination of it with alcoholism. And not just that. What we find in many cases is forced marriages, where a woman has been forced by her family to marry somebody for whatever reason. For a long time, because of the relationship between the parents and each other, all sorts of funny reasons. And social pressure, community pressure forces the girl to get married to somebody she doesn't like. And after the marriage, the man tries to show he is in control. And he rapes her. And she tries to take the case to court, and no one seems to want to recognize that anything happened. And they treat marital rape as if somehow the marriage contract, the agreement to love and to care in sickness and in health, to provide, to take care of, to show love, mercy, compassion, to treat your wife, in one of the metaphors, the way you would treat your farm, where your family depends on the success of your agriculture, that you will till the ground with compassion, expecting good to come out of it. The Quran describes the relationship between men and women as being like garments. The Arabic says, Hunna libasul lakum wa antum libasul lahunna. They are like your garments, you know, like your clothing, just as you are like clothing to them too. You protect each other. The Quran describes men and women as awliya of each other, protecting friends and partners of each other. That the objective of marriage is mawadda, love, wa rahmah, and compassion, wa sakina, and tranquility. We can't use the religious vocabulary when we look at the objectives of marriage to try and in any way justify marital rape. It is an offense. Of course, a lot needs to go into society and sensitization. Otherwise, women just continue to be treated as slaves, but just under another name, a more honorable name called wife. When we look at the problems to do with witnessing for rape, it is difficult to get witnesses for rape. But science has progressed. And just as in theft, as in murder, so also in rape, we need to have more trained people in the use of forensics, the awareness of its availability. The doctor should be the first place a rape victim should go to. That families should know somebody has been raped. That if a man or a woman, and usually a woman, has been raped, first thing to do, go to the doctor, let them get samples, let them have a swab test, let them get DNA, whatever evidence they would use. Regarding what to do about it, the fact that about 95% of cases are unreported, it makes it very difficult to do anything if it's not being reported. But we need to create more safe spaces where people feel comfortable reporting, where they feel something will happen if they report, that justice will take place. And I think this is an area we need a lot more creativity than we have seen so far. Girls get pregnant and no consequence. And in some cases, she is expected to continue in life with the difficulty of that pregnancy. If she wants it, no problem. But in Islamic jurisprudence, rape and an early abortion, if it is done before the time of ensoulment, and I know this is an area where there's difference of opinion between Islam and Catholicism, but diversity within Christianity. But in Islamic jurisprudence, it is true. There are some Muslims who say even a rape victim should take pregnancy to its final delivery. But because of a hadith where the Prophet said, while the fetus is alive in the womb from day one, life is breathed, the soul is breathed into it on the 120th day. And so Muslim jurists regard it permissible, though discouraged, but permissible, to abort a child before 120th day, or the first, during the first 4 months. After that, it's only a threat to the life of the mother that would justify that. To conclude, when it comes to what to do, I think we need a lot of creativity. I think we live in a society where we need more sensitization. And as Father George said, our role as religious leaders is to always try and touch the pain of the time. And there are many pains: religious extremism, bigotry, hate speech, whipping up sentiments that eventually all lead to violence and crisis. But now that rape is on the agenda, I think this is the big issue. And I'm very happy to see a lot of faith groups and interfaith groups. Every day, there's another group with a religious leader speaking about it and putting the religious stamp of approval on the need to fight this scourge. I think on the legal side, the way we handle armed robbery, kidnapping, and murder, if you are a witness to it and you know it happens, there's a punishment for concealing it. I think we need to start looking at rape probably that way. What kind of punishment should a police have for mishandling rape? Something that will make police, the moment you say rape, start thinking of his own or her own self-preservation and quickly move away from, so what were you doing there? And he starts to behave as if he's the judge or as if he's in court. To ensure that, because most sex offenders, most rape perpetrators, once investigation starts, we realize that they are repeat offenders. That most cases of rape, even in the Me Too movement, once somebody has been accused and a safe space has been created, others start feeling comfortable speaking up. And then you realize that this case that you are in a dilemma, should I report or should we talk to the person? Once you report and it has come out, you actually realize that there were about 8 other people who decided not to report, which gave a protection and a safe space for the criminal to continue to operate undercover and under the protection of those who thought they were forgiving. We should be more victim-centric, survivor-centric. The person who has gone through rape is more desiring of our compassion than the perpetrator. Because you are giving the, actually, even when you catch the perpetrator and you are thinking last chance, that's actually his 10th chance. He has done it again and again. So definitely to the need to look at our laws, look at the need for rape kits, look at the need for training, look at better counseling, better safe space. When somebody has been raped, what to do about it, who to speak to. And yes, you will always find those who want to blame you for your dressing and what were you doing there and all of that, but not to forget.
Okay, Sheikh, I'll need to interject. Okay. If you could try and round up a little bit so that...
Yes, I'm on my last minute. Thank you. So the need to also remember, when an armed robber stops you and has robbed somebody or robbed you, you don't start asking, but what were you doing on the road in the night? What were you doing moving at such a slow pace? What were you doing on that road? When somebody robs in your house, we don't start asking, what kind of door did you have? What kind of burglar proofing? And we forget the big crime of the main offender. So while we should have a holistic approach absolutely to this problem, no doubt about it, there's a lot to be done on every level. But I think what's going on now, more talking about it, more laws coming out, the government, the society, the legal system taking it more seriously. I think a lot needs to be done, continues to be done by all stakeholders, religious leaders in particular, in ensuring that we speak up and ensure that this pain is treated appropriately. Thank you very much for your patience and your time, and God bless you. All the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sheikh Nuruddeen. Thank you. Of course, we're going to come back to you and Father George, because some questions have been coming in as you are speaking. It generated quite a bit of interest. I'm going to now call on Dr. Chichi Aniagolu, to our discussant, to make her intervention. And Chichi, you've got 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ngozi, and I must commend you and your team for organizing this event. I'll just start. I'm not going to repeat what everybody has said, because I mean, we're all here and we heard, but I think that certain things jumped at me that I really would like to talk about and amplify as well. I think Father George, he talked a lot about the power relations, about rape being about power. And I think it is something that we really need to understand, that the base of rape is control, you know, and I do agree with him as well when he talks about the people who do this as people who are sick. But I think that if we listen to what Nuruddeen talked about, you know, he reminded us that a lot of rape cases are actually within the family. And so we cannot be externalizing rape. We cannot always be thinking about rape as something that is happening on the outside. This is something that is happening within families. And so, and that's part of the reason why it is so silent, because not only is it a shame for the girl, it's also a shame for the family that something like this is being perpetuated. Father George talked about male chauvinism. And I think for me, you know, this again, of course, ties back to the power relations that we talk about. And I think that this is something that the church is should be very clear, you know, in talking about and really talking about, you know, how male chauvinism and male power is perpetuating not just rape, but a lot of the system collapse, you know, for want of a better word, we are facing in Nigeria today. I think it's very important to note that both religions, you know, do not condone rape in any sense of the word. You know, and so, you know, if you look at the Old Testament, there are very, very, you know, stringent punishments against rape, in the same way that Nuruddeen had talked about it being in Islam. But I think that maybe what the challenge for the church is that, just like Father George said, that sex is not being discussed in a healthy way. You know, for many churches, you know, sin has, of course, vanished, especially when we look at our different denominations. If we look at our Pentecostal churches and things, which is good because it's important for people to, you know, have a very positive outlook to life. But part of what religion does is to remind us, you know, of our own obligations to God, not just God's obligations to us. And so we're moving away from discussing our obligations to God, which includes, you know, self-control. So when, you know, sex is discussed in the context of sin, the focus often in churches, and I will talk a lot more about church because I'm a Christian, and that's the religion that I understand more. When sex is discussed, it's not discussed in a healthy way, like Father George said. You know, raging teenagers need to have a healthy relationship with the topic of sex. Yes, of course, as religious institutions, we must continue to emphasize that sex is only allowed within a marriage. But what happens to the teenager, you know, who begins to have all sorts of sexual feelings, and they have nowhere to go to, and then they go to church, and the only thing they hear in church is about how terrible sex is and why it is bad and why it needs to be, but nobody says, yes, but we know that you're going through these feelings. So I think it's important. And then when it is discussed at all, it is often the girl who is admonished. I know that Father George had talked about this, but he's in the minority when you talk about the preaching that goes on in churches. Often it is, if we're discussing sex, it's about how the girl is dressed, where they went, who they associated with. The boy who actually perpetuates the crime is treated as the victim. He was the one who was seduced. She should not have gone to his house. She's the one, the boy is the one, who is a victim. And that's what is reinforced, in a lot of the preaching that we hear. And I'm glad that some of that is changing as people are becoming a lot more aware of what the consequences are, and also as well, as long as more, as it's coming out more, that younger and younger children, are being involved. So the thing about justifying a crime is that you have no idea how far the criminal is willing to go. We can say that we saw that with Boko Haram, where even the president said that an attack on Boko Haram was an attack on the North. Like Boko Haram, the rapist has run amok, raping 2-year-olds, 70-year-olds, daughters, cousins. So now who can blame a 2-year-old for what she was wearing? What did the daughter who was raped by the father do? How do we have, now we have to deal with rape, and the church has to be on the forefront. And I'm talking about the church and the mosque as well, because this is where people get the moral being. This is where people, go to understand how they need to do and how they need to relate in a society. So for me, the church has to talk about sex in a healthy way. We cannot promote premarital sex like that. So, but we must talk about sex in a healthy way. And it's a good thing that Father George has talked about this. And I really will recommend that this seminar, be held with mostly religious people, priests and imams and pastors, and they need to be hearing this. The focus must shift from women to men. This idea that men are animals, with untamable sexual appetite, it's unrealistic. And as a result, women need to be the ones cautioned to protect themselves against men, But we have to remember that if you're a Christian, that Jesus Christ, our Redeemer, is a man. And he chose men as his disciples. He didn't have one single woman. So most of his teachings were to men. So if the things he preached were impossible for men, he would not have taught them. He taught that adultery was not just the act of sex, like Father said, but one that will have, that starts with an impure thought. So it is what is in a man's heart that leads him to sin, not what a woman is wearing. The church needs to change the focus, and of course, looking at the example of the woman that was caught in adultery and how Jesus Christ dealt with that. He turned the table on the men who were likely responsible even for her act. Maybe the person who she had the adultery with was right there, ready to stone her as well. But Jesus focused on the thoughts of the men, because it is from the abundance of your heart, that anything comes true. So, but we also have to understand, again, if we're looking at this untamable, sexual appetite of men that we promote a lot in the church, and saying, men are like this, so women, you need to protect yourself, you need to do this. Let us look at African history. Let us look at African past. A lot of people are ashamed of the African past, and you see write-ups of people saying, oh no, Africans didn't walk around naked. People are ashamed of the fact that Africans at one point, in time, walked around naked. But for me, it is a history I am most proud of, because it shows that the image of the African male as a sexual predator is a colonial and racist construct, amplified, unfortunately, by the missionaries who first came to Africa. African men saw African women every day, naked, and never raped them. So we have a proud heritage of noble men. Our churches who have done a lot in trying to Africanize, the religions that the missionaries did, need to also Africanize the image of the African male. The African male is not an animal. The African male is not, this beast that everybody needs to be locked up and he can then go on his rampaging. And if unfortunately he catches you on the way, then it's your fault because you had been told that there is an animal, on the rampage. That image, that construct of what an African male is, of what a Nigerian man is, needs to change because it is not true. Many of our traditional societies were very, very harsh on rape. It just didn't happen in many places because the consequence was just way too much. And maybe that's the problem. What is the consequence today, for people who rape? What is it that we're doing, for people who rape? So the church has to remind men that sexual sin has not been removed from the Bible, from the holy books. You talk about whether it is fornication or adultery or rape, it's still going to be judged by God. So the idea that boys will be boys and you know how men are will not cut it on the last day. So it is the responsibility of the church to constantly remind men. And if you are a man and you have authority, we have a patriarchal society in which men have dominance. So everybody looks to the leader. It is the leader who changes discourse. It is the leader who takes people to the next level. And so we need to rescue our men from the mentality that they have today. We need to rescue our men from this insanity of, sexual corruption, of moral corruption, of economic corruption, of political corruption. The leadership of our country, when it comes to the patriarchy, that we have, needs a lot of overhaul. And I do believe that the church and the mosque really needs a role to play in that. I really liked what Madam Nuruddeen talked about, describing the way, I just absolutely loved his description of how, the Quran describes men and women as a garment, that, we know what a dress does for us. A dress not only doesn't just cover your nakedness, it gives you a sense of pride, it gives you a sense of image. If you're wearing a lovely dress, you know how that makes you. If this is the image that Islam has about men and women, I'm not sure that a lot of men and women, Muslim men and women, know this. So I think that there is a lot of education to be done, because what we hear, I mean, at least many times when I have read about rape cases, what we see judges passing down is that, the punishment for the rapist is to marry the raped. That's what you see coming out of some Sharia courts. How is that a punishment? You rape somebody, you're told to marry the person that you raped. So if this is not correct, I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done. I think that this idea of men and women being a garment, to each other is an absolutely beautiful imagery that has to be promoted. And there needs to be a lot of discussions about, male dominance and about the construction of sexual relations between men and women going on also in Islam. Finally, I would like to say that I do know that rape may be a difficult conversation for the church, because it has also, had its fair share of rape cases. A lot of, just like Ngozi's introductions talked about, a lot of imams and pastors and whatnot, and priests as well have been indicted in this situation. So many in the church, and many of the good people in the church, may already be feeling condemned by the sins of the few and not feel justified to speak about rape and sexual violence, because of course the churches and the mosques are also implicated. But the church needs to remember, and often I believe they forget, they are just an instrument of the divine and not the divine. So if you're an instrument, the church is an institution. you know, as an instrument of the divine. And so the church has to remind, I am just a vehicle. I am not the destination. And so Jesus promised us that if there was no one to worship him anymore, that the very stones themselves would be raised to worship him. So the church should not feel ashamed of the exposure of sexual and other crimes that are going on within its four walls. It is the Lord's purging of his vessel. If in the end, only 10 people remain, he will use them to repopulate his house.
Okay.
So, and I also think that, so if we remember that, then we need to be, I don't have 1 second left.
Okay.
We are done.
Okay.
So we also need to begin to hear from male rapists. It's important that the church creates avenues. There are a lot of people who are rapists who come and confess and they want to, and they change. It's important to understand what the mentality of the rapist is, because we may postulate all we can here, but do we really know what goes on in the mind of an uncle, in the mind of a parent or a cousin or whatever that rapes their relative? It's important that the church, you know, begins to help us understand that when they hear these things in confessionals or these people come to talk to them. Of course, you don't expose who the person is, but it's important for us to begin to understand the mentality of the rapist, because that's the only way we can actually address the issue. And finally, I would like to say that men, we need to understand, and the church needs to say this, that men do not have a right to women's bodies. They don't. No means no. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Chichi, for your interventions. We'll quickly go to Mr. Omagbitse Barrow to discuss the presentations we've heard so far.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I hope I am audible and that you can also see me. I would like to, very importantly, thank the organizers, like everyone has done. I think that we need to have more conversations around this subject matter more often, because it will certainly help with the work that the church or the mosques are doing and our faith is trying to do to get people aware at all levels. So thank you, and let's keep the conversations going. I'm just going to touch on a few things and just expand on some of the conversations that we've already heard. And then I would end very quickly with just talking about a few, putting them into blocks of things that we should pay attention to. The first thing I'd like to say is that when we think about the church and we talk about the religious, I want us to all remember that the church, for example, also includes not just the ministers, the pastors and the priests, but also all of us who are part of the congregation of this church. And that in reality, even the priests and the pastors and everybody else came from the congregation. Nobody was born a priest, a pastor, a bishop, or an imam. So we were all ordinary members, to use that word. And I'm saying this because we all have to take collective responsibility. I find too often that people think about the church and they say it is the priests and the pastors and the bishops. So when you ask, what is the church doing? Like many of us are thinking right now, I want you to also recognize that the church includes you. If you are a Muslim, Islam includes you, not just the clerics. The second thing that I want to speak about quickly is around, so what is it that is also wrong sometimes? And I listen to Father George and I listen to Sheikh Lemu, very interesting around what is the common discourse. And Dr. Chichi also brought this up. What is the current, what is it that we talk about more in our places of worship? Are we actually, like Father George said, teaching morals and values? And what exactly are we celebrating? So even as people who are in a faith community, the question I'm asking and I want to challenge ourselves with is, are we teaching morals? Are we teaching values? Or are we teaching prosperity? Are we celebrating prosperity by whatever means the prosperity came? Because a lot of the people that, just like Sheikh Lemu said, a lot of the people who are perpetrators of sexual violence and rape are repeat offenders. And they are often people, like we have all learned today, in positions of power. So we are celebrating powerful politicians, powerful celebrities, powerful wealthy people in the private sector. And in this sense of celebrity, are we not saying that everything that they do is therefore okay? And when we hear that, when someone says, oh, a very powerful man like the gentleman in the US, Jeffrey Epstein, is guilty of rape, everybody says, no, it's not possible, because such a powerful person who has such powerful friends, who sits with powerful people, cannot have done something like that, because our psyche is all focused on these human definitions of power and success that is built around materialism and, you know, what people possess. So this is very important also. So just to recap on everything that everyone has said so far, I would just like to talk around three things. Some of it has already been said, and I will just reiterate some of those things and conclude. Firstly, the mind. There's work to be done in our human psyche. Secondly, around advocacy. And then thirdly, around safeguards and structures in our society. And all of us, Christians and Muslims, whether we are lay people or we are ministers, all of us have a responsibility in these three areas: in the mind, in advocacy, and in ensuring the right safeguards in society. So let me talk quickly about the mind. We've spoken about pornography, and I want to reiterate this, that growing up as a child, and even now as a parent, I find that we tell our children, we list all the bad things that children should not do. But I'll be honest, growing up, nobody listed pornography. And I think it's a big issue. So pornography for me is that thing that really messes up the minds of young people and everybody as you grow older. You know, so very important. We tell young people, don't take drugs, don't hang out with bad gangs. We say don't drink, don't do this. But the issue of pornography, there's a lot of silence around it. And I think that it's a major factor in driving some of this sexual violence. The other issue around mental health, and I won't talk too much about it, everything has been said. I think we need to start paying attention, for example, in our schools, with psychiatric evaluations for people who are in positions of power. The same thing with our churches and our mosques, people who are in positions of power in those institutions that are very exposed to young people. Can we start to talk and actually act on psychiatric evaluations for our teachers? And third thing that I think it's important regarding the mind is music. And again, closely related to secular music is the celebrities that are behind this music. And I'm sure you're all aware of people like R. Kelly, the very popular celebrity musician in the United States, and all the issues around his own sexual violence and rape cases. I think that celebrities and secular music is something that we should pay much more attention to, because a lot of it is really driving some of these inappropriate thinking, actions, and behaviors. In the area of advocacy, we've spoken about teaching about sexuality and teaching about it in a proper way, in an open, engaging way, not in a threatening way. And not just in our churches and in our mosques, but in our homes, in our schools, from parents, this concept of your daughter is pregnant, or this concept of sexuality, like is pregnant, so I am ashamed as a parent. It's not about your shame. It should be about the fact that this thing is not right, not that you are ashamed of it. So we need to take the conversation away from our shame to what is right and what is wrong. And of course, we need to have more conversations. And finally, around safeguards and structure, I think that we've talked about forensics, very important, rape kits and all of these things. And the truth is, fingerprints don't even exist in Nigeria. Crimes cannot be solved using fingerprints in Nigeria, talk less of things like rape kits. So those of us who are in positions of influence in politics and in governance, these are the types of things that we must raise and pursue as advocates, because these are the things that really create the right basis for society to thrive and for people to have the freedoms that democracy is meant to bring. Identity management is closely related to forensics, whistleblowing, and very importantly, blacklisting. Over the years, people have been accused of, people have been found guilty of rape and sexual violence. We need to start creating a database, a blacklist for schools, for jobs, for all sorts of things, so that we know, and that type of ostracizing will also help to deter people from these types of inappropriate behaviors. So essentially, I've spoken about just 3 things. We need to work on our minds as individuals and work on the minds of our children and people around us. We have to do work in advocacy, and we've spoken a lot about all the advocacy that needs to be done. More conversations like these in our churches, in our homes, in our schools, in our offices, and also some of the structures and safeguards in society, law enforcement, blacklisting, whistleblowing, and so on and so forth. And I hope that we can continue these conversations. And I again thank you all for listening and being here. I see large numbers of people from all over Nigeria and perhaps abroad. And thank the organizers for doing such a great job putting this together this morning.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Omagbitse. So much has been said, and I have so much that I want to, say or questions for you, but I think because of time, I see one hand has been up since we started. I think we're going to take Mary Arasomi, and it's just two minutes because there are loads of questions for all the people who have spoken. Thank you so much, all the panelists, once again, for the different perspectives that you've shared with us this morning. Is Mary on? Is she on? Okay, her hand is no longer up. Can we take Buki Shonibare? Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
2 minutes, please. You have just 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, so just a quick one. Thanks for organizing this. I listened in and it's quite educating. I just want to mention that what Mr. Barrow mentioned during his presentation regarding blacklisting. We have a framework for that already, which is the Sexual Offenders Register, and it is part of the provisions that was made in the Violence Against Persons Prohibitions Act. What is important, and where I think the church and the mosque can come in, is ensuring that this list is populated. So what that requires is when there are sexual offenders within our system, we must report them to NAPTIP, especially when they have been prosecuted, so that they can be enlisted. The Sexual Offenders Register will be publicized, and for the purposes of jobs, schools that Mr. Barrow mentioned, they would know the sexual predators among us and know they should not employ or engage them to work with people who are at risk of being sexually abused. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Buki. Can we have Teresa Olanio? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, Teresa, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you for the presentations, for all those, the speakers. Please, I would like you to explain further how you will encourage the different sectors, the churches, the malls, the schools, to have safeguarding policy, safeguarding team, awareness program, and also to encourage the implementation of this policy so that everyone will hear about abuse and will know what to do. Because it is obvious that we do not know much about abuse, about the dangers, parents don't talk about it, schools hardly mention it. How would you encourage or organize programs for these different sectors so that we all know about it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. I want to say among those of us who are still about to speak, if you have a question, please can you just post it on the chat box? You know, I'm going to call Sister Lena Mwenyi to speak.
I have a little question.
Okay.
How do we ensure that those in power are brought to the book when this happens? Because many people, the employers, they kind of hypnotize their workers or the employees, and then some people, because they are, I don't want to use the name, whether senators or whatever they call themselves, they are being, kind of portraying themselves as if they are the power that holds, and then nobody is going to kind of prosecute them. How are we going to be sure that they will be prosecuted, any of them, that nobody is above the law when it comes to prosecution? Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have just 30 minutes left. I think maybe we should take because some of these questions coming have already been sent in to the question boxes. So I want to read out the questions for the different speakers, and any other person whose questions are not among these questions, we can then take those ones as a second round. For Father George, there's a question on what do you think, what plans, if you can share any plans that the CBCN has, to teach sexuality, because you canvassed sexuality when you were speaking, that there should be sexuality education. So someone wants to know if the CBCN has any plans for that. Then if you could speak to the issue of the abuse of the interpretation of where St. Paul says that the man is the head of the family, and as a result, it's interpreted to mean that the man is entitled to a woman's body. So can you speak to the issue of rape in marriage? Could there be rape in marriage, and how should that be handled? The other thing that's said to be misinterpreted is the passage in Genesis where it says that the woman was created from the rib of the man. And this is often interpreted to mean that the woman is a little less than the man, is inferior to the man. What can you say about that? There's a question for Sheikh on child marriage. Since and I think you spoke to that, Sheikh Nuruddeen, already on that there can be rape within marriage. But someone wants to say that can forced marriages in themselves now in Islam, or at least in our cultural practice, can it be taken to mean rape? So if somebody is forced into marriage, can that marriage be treated as a sexual abuse situation? There's another question for both Sheikh Nuruddeen and Father George. The religious leaders that are perpetrators on both sides, whether in Islam or in Christianity, what can the faith communities or the church communities do to respond to this situation when they know that among their clergy are perpetrators? What will be the response of the religious leaders to that? There's another question for Father George. Questions are too many. The question that says, what should be done about women who cover up their husband rapists? Because there are situations where the man is clearly a rapist, or there are cases where within the home, the woman knows that the husband is raping, or even when the man has been apprehended and reported to the police, and the women still cover up. What should be done in that kind of situation? Sheikh Nuruddeen, someone wants to know, when preparing young people for married life, since you've spoken about the concept of rape in marriage. Is this part of the preparation that young people get for marriage in our culture? Are they told that, you know, if you are forced into marriage, any act of intercourse there is rape, so that at least they know that right and they can speak up? The other aspect of that is if people are being raped, a girl or a young person is being raped in the marriage, can that person speak up and bring it up that this is what she's experiencing, and who would she channel that to? There one more question for both, one for Father George. There's somebody who disagrees with you, Father George, when you say that the victim should not be blamed. And the reason for that is that the Bible said if your right hand will cause you to sin, you should cut it out. So why would a young girl go and visit a man who lives alone in the night? What will you say about that? Does your position that the victim is never to blame, does it still hold in this situation? And then lastly, for Sheikh Nuruddeen, somebody would like you to throw more light on the fact that both men and women are perpetrators of rape. Because it's usually considered, the common belief is that rape is something that men do. So we can start with Father George. Father George, are you there? Is Father George still there? Father George, are you there? I hope you got all the questions. There were so many.
Well, I already started taking note of the questions before you read them. And very quickly to go through the question on the scripture passages, I will refer the person to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, which begins with be subject to one another in Christ, out of reverence for Christ. Bishe and Chichi will remember that I spent 2 Sundays dealing with this issue, that there is so much abuse of that passage by people who want to manipulate scripture passages for their selfish, oppressive intent. Now, the passage begins, of St. Paul begins with, be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, Nigerian men who want to manipulate, they don't quote that passage. The next one, verse 22 says, wives, be subject to your husband. Now, it is within a particular cultural context, and based on the practice and the interventions of Jesus and his teaching, it is clear that from where they were before Jesus came to where Jesus Christ raised the understanding of the female folk to, there is no room in Christianity for a subservient relationship of women to men. It is an equal relationship. I mean, you see what Jesus Christ said about when they say, oh, Moses told us that we can just give a certificate of divorce and send her away. And she said, no way. So Christianity, there was a poor understanding of this dignity in the Old Testament, of equal dignity in the Old Testament. But Jesus has understood that we are created equal. Now, Genesis chapter, the Genesis passage about being made from the side, from the rib of the man, is about equality. That the woman was not made from the leg, the woman was not made from the hand, the woman was made from the heart, as it were. Talking about the rib, from where the heart is. So it's about the fact that they are actually equal and they should travel together equally towards God. So let me go quickly to the next one. The issue of, there's been a lot of questions about or disagreements about modesty. Now, like I said, Christians and Muslims keep teaching modesty, and I will continue along with many colleagues of mine to teach modesty in dress, but there is no excuse, absolutely no excuse. I mean, it's because our laws are not adequate in this country, the implementation of our laws. It's because our policing system is poor. Otherwise, go to go to more organized society and say that it is because you saw a naked girl that you rape her, you will spend the rest of your life in jail. The issue is, when Jesus Christ says, if your eye makes you sin, cut it off. If your own eye looks at a naked woman and is making you sin, cut off your eye. It is not the woman that should cut off her body. You will cut off your eye if it is going to make you sin. When our society gets to that point where laws are applied properly, and then we don't have the kind of police we have now that will ask you, what were you wearing when you went there? When it is demonstrated that indeed you raped somebody, you will spend the rest of your life in jail. So this is it that we should all be advocating for and working towards organized societies where laws work. Then young boys growing up, when you know the consequences of a violent sexual crime, when you know that you may be identified and be carrying a banner on your chest that I am a sex offender, which is what is happening in many parts of America. When you know that, when you see the sanctions and consequences that we follow, even if you see people naked on the streets, even if you see people naked with you in the bus, as we normally see, those of us who travel, literally naked with you on the bus, you can think whatever you think in your mind, but no action can take place because you will spend the rest of your life in jail. So we need to get to such a society where people know that they have a responsibility to check their impulses. We're not animals. And as Chichi said, I like to emphasize what Chichi said. Cotton in commercial quantity came to Nigeria only 102 years ago, 1918. Before 1918, most people in this country, this territory we call Nigeria, walked around naked. Most young women up to their marriage time, they walked about only with beads around their waist. And we were not told that they were raping themselves. Ask people who are over 80 years old, and they will tell you how they went to school naked. So if we are now in a situation where simply seeing the forearm of a woman, you are tempted to rape the woman, then it means that we are sick, and we need to deal with it as a psychiatric problem rather than blame the other person, because the other person is responsible for her immodesty. She will be accountable to God for her immodesty, but you are responsible for how you control your eyes and how you control the use of your eyes. Now, next is the issue of sexuality education for boys. I mentioned it, but it is true that the churches need to do a lot more. Parents need to do a lot more in educating the boys. Boys and girls have not been sufficiently educated in sexuality in this country. In fact, the education of girls is simply in order to avoid pregnancy in most cases, but not to appreciate the wonderful gift of human sexuality and reproduction. Very little of that is happening. It is simply to avoid pregnancy. And with boys, next to nothing is happening with regards to education. So boys are growing wild, and especially as Bishop mentioned, with pornography, with the pornographic culture, it's like we are living in a jungle. I keep telling people, you are what you watch. The more people expose themselves to pornographic content, the more incapable they will be to control their raw animalistic impulses. Next is the religious institutions. Now, religious institutions and what we do about violators, people guilty of rape. Now, on account of some of the cases we have had in the Catholic Church on the international level, in the last 10 years, there have been strict regulations. Every priest, for example, that you see around this country that belong to different dioceses and congregations, they have signed an indemnity form. Indemnity form meaning that if you do not handle your sexuality seriously and you go randy and anything happens, you will be apart from being relieved of your priestly ministry, you will be responsible for the consequences of your actions. So you don't sue the diocese. We have indemnity form that we have all signed that the diocese is not to be taken to be responsible. I will be responsible if I misbehave. So all those, that is one. Two, we have a Center for Protection of Children and Vulnerable People in the Vatican. And that center has drawn all kinds of modalities and protocols for the protection of children, and vulnerable people. And every diocese is supposed to have a committee. Perhaps not all dioceses have done it. And every religious institution like colleges and universities that are Catholic are supposed to have a standing committee to look into accusations of abuse in this area. Every Catholic institution, every Catholic diocese, and so on and so forth. We have the child molestation or vulnerable people molestation and abuse. We have policies that have been drawn out by the Center for Child Protection in Rome. Those who are interested should Google it and then see what it is. And now urge our dioceses and our institutions, if you belong to a tertiary institution that is Catholic, even in secondary school, we are now supposed to domesticate those protocols and policies in our various places. And quickly, if religious leaders are guilty of rape, whether Christian or Muslim, we are now to begin, all of us should begin to campaign that any of our colleagues that are guilty of that should face the fiercest consequences. Because since you are supposed to be a leader and a light, and you are supposed to be the one to protect the people in the society, if you are now guilty, it's like a policeman being caught of stealing, then he should face the fiercest punishment. The most brutal punishment should be meted to any of us that is guilty of these things that we're supposed to be preaching against and working against. And I must say that we have a lot of instructions from the Vatican in the Catholic Church that say you cannot, under any circumstance, protect or cover up anybody who is found to be guilty or to have committed an offense. Now, women are covering up their husbands that are guilty of rape. I think it's very clear. If you cover up your husband that is guilty of rape, what's happening is that people don't commit rape once. These offenders are they are repeated offenders. They are going to continue, and eventually the shame is going to come back to the family. So it is better that your marriage is at risk and you report, and something will be done about it, than to get the ultimate shame. Now, the false accusations, that's a very serious one, because the consequences for conviction of anybody of rape are so serious. I mean, it is like next to murder. If somebody deliberately accuses somebody falsely, then if it can be proven that it is false through forensic methods and so on and so forth, then such a person should be meted with equally serious, serious punishment. There's psychological healing work. Some of our church institutions have started doing psychological training. Lux Terra, for example, my foundation, has an institute where people take master's degree in psychospiritual therapy. Part of it is to help people to be trained in psychosocial and psychospiritual integration so that people can better handle their spiritual and psychological impulses and grow to be more wholesome human beings. So we have an institute, and then we have courses that we do in trauma healing to help people who are survivors. Am I to stop?
No, Father, just try and take your questions quickly, the answers.
Yeah, I'm doing that quickly, very quickly. Now, on the issue of what the churches can do, what religious organizations can do, regular workshops, and these workshops should be segmented. CWO, women's groups, youth groups, men's groups. Then organizing parenting workshop is very important. We need to have a lot more comprehensive workshop on parenting for people who are going into marriage and people who are in marriage, especially just preparatory for their children becoming teenagers. We need workshops. So it's not a one-off affair. It shouldn't be just before marriage. It should be continuous. As the children go to certain age, the different stages in life, there should be preparation of them to meet the challenges of those ages. Now, there is no room for jungle justice. So the issue of jungle justice for people who are guilty of rape, in the modern society, people should be taken through the rudiments of law, through all the processes of law before punishment. No room for jungle justice. Now, as Bishop says, that we are the church. Those of us who are Christians, all of us are the church. So when you say, what is the church doing? What are you doing as a Christian civil society worker? That's part of what the church is doing. What are you doing as a Christian lawyer? That's part of what the church is doing. What are you doing as a Christian lecturer? That's part of what the church is doing. So thank you, Bishop, for mentioning that, because people keep thinking, what is the church doing as to what is the bishop doing? No, what are you doing as a member of the church? Then what is the pastor doing? These are different things, and they are all part of what the church is doing. And rape is evil, and there should never be any excuse for it. So this whole thing about the fact that the victim or the survivor can never be the guilty one, we should knock it off our mind completely, that it is such an intrinsically evil act that there should never be an excuse for it, unless the person is sick in the head. And those who are sick in the head, like I said, efforts should be made not only to put them in an asylum and send them to psychiatrists, but see how we can treat them so that they can perhaps get healed while serving punishment for their crime. Like I said, safeguard policies in the church for vulnerable people and children. Please Google and you will see the elaborate work that has been done by the Vatican in the last few years on it. And we are all supposed to work on it and have those safeguard policies in our various institutions. And it's supposed to be displayed, publicly displayed in strategic places in all our religious institutions. It is not yet domesticated by every single parish and every single place, but it is something that we need to go to very quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Father George. Can we take Sheikh Nuruddeen to get your responses to the questions?
Yes, thank you very much. I've been going just like with Father George, so I'll just run through the various questions, starting with those you've focused on. Number one, the question on early marriage. The age at which people get married has been increasing over the centuries by about 1 year every 10 years. Age of marriage has usually, in most societies, never been, until modern times, it has never been the business of government. It has been families that decide when is the appropriate age for what they call betrothal. Betrothal is where there's a formal marriage in the sense that they will tell you, yes, this person is married to this person, but it is when you've reached the age of puberty or maturity and the family is ready and you are settled and there's a house that the wife goes to the husband. So different cultures have had this all over the world. In every religion, this has been there. When it comes to what do we prescribe, I think this is a more contemporary question, where if we look at Muslims in Malaysia, in all sorts of countries, their scholars have come together with the sociologists, with the medical professionals to find out, you know, in a society where they have never put a minimum age, what would be an appropriate minimum age? Most societies never put a minimum age for holding a weapon, a bow and arrow. They've never put a minimum age for riding a donkey or a horse or a camel. However, when you look at the dangers associated with driving a motorcycle or a car or any of these things, new regulations come in new societies. And so this has not been a problem, other than the fact that unfortunately as a society, we have not invested in our religious scholarship. On one hand, we agree religious scholars are very important, very influential, and you can't move some policies without their backing. However, we seem not to care about their capacity building. So somebody who couldn't succeed in getting into any subject, we don't put our best and brightest into the area of religion. So somebody who is not educated, can't pass his WAEC or study or whatever, goes into religion, becomes influential, and suddenly they become a threat and we're asking what to do about it. Sorry, light problem. So I think if we look at it, this is cultural evolution moving into modern times, where from various fields we're realizing we have to put a minimum age for driving, for political office. We have to have ages of retirement. compulsory ages of retirement, either for economic reasons or for safety reasons in the case of pilots, etc. These are not things that were part of old religious teachings or anything before modern times. So I think this is an area where we need to look at how to engage more in the education and enlightenment of those religious scholars by other religious scholars who are more knowledgeable about these areas. But at what age did people marry anybody in the past has nothing to do with what we are currently facing. When you look in Islamic history, sorry?
If you can marry a 12-year-old, then you can sleep with...
Absolutely. I mean, we find, for example, in the Yoruba customary law, for example, the age of marriage starts at 12. Now, when you look at, for example, within Muslim community, they don't have a minimum age. And so, unfortunately, it has left it open for abuse. When you look at Islamic history, for example, during the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, some say he married Aisha, in other words, by way of the betrothal type of thing at the age of 9. Some scholars say, no, it was 11. Some say, no, it was 16. Others say, no, it was 19. At what time did he marry off his daughter? At the age of 19. So on the historical calculation, they have differing opinions there. But that is what in legal language is called descriptive. In other words, whether he married this one at the age of 40 or at the age of 20 or at the age of whatever, that's describing history. It's not imposing a limitation on us today. Just as if at this age people were allowed to still join the army, it doesn't mean now that we understand how dangerous our weapons are that that would still be accepted or that we should be bound by past laws. There are many new laws that society, from traffic laws, that we find this is in our common interest, and if we don't respect them, we will be undermining justice, safety, and security that religion actually tries to protect. On the issue to do with, and this is tied to also the subject of statutory rape. Once a community can agree, this is the minimum age of marriage, then it goes. And in some states in the north, they've been able to agree on that. In other places, they have not been able to know how to get the religious scholars on board. And unless they really look at how to approach it, getting scholars who are good at it, even Kanu State, the Emir of Kanu, got a team of scholars to try and bring some reforms, some of the best scholars. But because of how they approached it, unfortunately, the ignorance of so many, they weren't able to push something that even their scholars would recommend. So this question of strategy, how do we engage, and to look at the fruit we are reaping, and when did we start planting this type of thing. The issue, and I think Father George has already handled the question of sexual abuse and men of God. From the Islamic perspective, of course, in the Sunni tradition, in the Shia tradition, there's an idea of clergy. In the Sunni tradition, we don't have a concept of clergy. It's more survival of the most fitting, survival of the most knowledgeable, supposed to be, but sometimes you get it being just who is popular within a community, a little like in the Protestant system. But there's no idea of a man of God. Only God knows who is his person. So as a human being, we should look at you. If you've done something wrong, you should be prosecuted. If you have a greater responsibility, as Father George says, you should even have a greater punishment for abusing the privileges you have. I think we need to challenge the power distance between ordinary, sensible people and religious people and remove the halo on them as if they are, somehow sanctified already by God. I like the distinction between people who are concerned with the divine. In other words, they are supposed to be instruments of the divine, and the divine itself. Human beings are human beings and are as open to Satan. And Satan would want to tempt anybody. If he can try to tempt Jesus, tempt Muhammad, tempt anybody, we should be on our guard. Unfortunately, there's the halo we put around religious people, which, there's the plus and minus about it. But I think it's better to prevent and have systems in place that make it more difficult for those who have come as wolf in sheep's clothing to get away with what they're doing. About forced marriages, again, the moment, for example, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, made it clear that you cannot marry your daughter without her consent. And the minimum, he's even said, her silence can be taken as her consent where it is clear it's because she is shy that she doesn't want to say, yes, I accept. However, what we find in most societies is until recently, most marriages were arranged marriages. What is called love marriage, where you go to find out who you want to marry, is actually a very more contemporary thing. In most traditional societies, in most cultures in the world, arranged marriages has been the norm. And before we criticize arranged marriages, I would advise anybody to go and check divorce rates in arranged marriages. Divorce rates in arranged marriages are the maximum highest figure I've seen is around 7%. Most of them are actually around 4%. 4%. When love marriages are hovering between 25 and 40, in Spain it's up to 60-something%. Divorce rates. The problem is, arranged marriages happen when the family are picking your suitor and picking who they feel is in your best interest. And you usually have social, oh, all right, you may not love the person, but they will tell you love will grow later. Because it has worked so well for many, many feel that's the way to go. You don't know what's good for you. Unfortunately, because we don't have a minimum age, that is at age of maturity, and different countries will put age of consent. America puts age of consent around 16, age of marriage, depends on the states. Generally, it's 18. Some countries have more than that. But where a particular state in Nigeria, being a federal system, has not concluded on what is its own, then it opens the door for abuse. In Malaysia, they do not. The Islamic scholars have agreed on this. In Malaysia, you cannot go and conduct a marriage the way we have in Nigeria. In Nigeria, you just go and do, and you then inform the government registry that we want a certificate of marriage, we've married off our sons and daughters. In Malaysia, the Sharia court, your marriage is not recognized until it's a certificate from the Sharia court. It cannot be conducted until it is a trained imam from the Sharia court. That trained imam will have one-on-one discussions with the bride and groom to ensure there is no force, to ensure you are the age of consent, to ensure that you can provide. Because there's that screening, they don't have the problem of forced marriages. Having said that, we still find cultures where they will still insist on their daughters marrying this person, and they insist on the men marrying. So it's not that only women are victims of forced marriages. The issue of insufficient premarital counseling, I think that has already been mentioned, and warning and educating young people. And I think all those religious leaders, especially as rape is becoming an important challenge within marriages and outside marriages, these need to be incorporated into that. Women and men as perpetrators, somebody wanted more information on this. What I would suggest is if you can Google rape by gender. Just do rape by gender. Wikipedia has a good article on the different forms of rape. Men raping men, men raping women, women raping men, women raping women, and all the combinations and the statistics behind it. Some very scholarly articles on this particular subject of rape in Wikipedia that I think you'll find interesting. The issues to do with legal reform and, is DNA evidence accepted? Is marital rape recognized? This is all about, I think, the reforms we hope these type of conversations will generate more discussions, more debates, and start to articulate for those in the legal profession how to do things. Religious leaders can't solve all problems. It's not their job to solve all problems. They're to inspire people in the various fields so that religious individuals take initiative to bring the kind of reforms we need in all relevant sectors. However, it is also important to remember, as an important sociologist, I think it is Emile Durkheim said, where mores, where good culture, norms, good habits, where they are sufficient, laws are unnecessary. But where they are insufficient, laws are unenforceable. So while it is important for us to make all the necessary legal reforms, improve the prosecution system and all of that, we need to also improve the sensitization, the cultural stigma associated with this, which infuses, unfortunately, in many religious traditions we see in one place, but we don't see in another. The question about taking away pornography, unfortunately, legally, this is a big problem when it comes to freedom of information, access. Dubai had to go through a lot of struggle to be able to get the permission to block pornographic websites, and they could only do it for 4 years. I think with the Child's Rights Act, it should be possible to at least get the internet service providers to block access to internet for those who are registered with SIM cards and the person who has been registered is a minor. It may be more difficult to do it for adults, but I think we can do it legally. The framework is available, and I'm aware of some people who have already started looking into that. So I hope some progress is done there. The last one, somebody said, when you say, I have paid for you, so, you know, justification for rape, at least, and I'm sure it doesn't apply to Christianity, but it doesn't apply to Islam. You haven't paid for somebody when you give the mahar, what they call the sadaqi. In fact, the word is sadaqi. It comes from the word sadaqah, which means an act of charity, a gift. And that is why for marriage in Islam, if you can't afford the money, you can share knowledge, you can share any gift. It's a token to the other person. It's not a price for sexual access, nor is it a price for the person. God forbid that you are able, the people are able to say, I'm buying you with some material value. So we have to remember, whatever you are paying, it's not a payment for something. It is a gift. Just as you don't say charity is a payment, it's a gift. I think it's our vocabulary around the area that is colonial, left over from English, traditional English law of the idea of bride price. When you are getting married, you paid for nothing to justify violence, and there was no part, never part of the deal that this was going to be an excuse, that this charity called the mahar or the sadaqi was in any way an excuse to commit evil in the name of religion. I hope I have answered most of the questions. I think Father George has handled most of the others. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much, Sheikh Nuruddeen. Wow, this has been really, really very insightful. There's been a lot of interest in this issue. And sadly, we have even overshot our time. So we need to bring this to a close now. I want to start by thanking all the attendees. We have had people that came in, about 160, 170 people that stayed, you know, throughout the course of this conversation. That's been 2 hours. So thank you very much. I want to thank Father George and the Lux Terra Foundation. You know, it's been an honor. It's always an honor for us to do anything with Lux Terra Foundation and Father George, because, you know, our values, we share, you know, the same values, and the commitment to social justice on the part of Lux Terra, it's something that inspires us. So we are very honored to have partnered with you in putting this together. I want to thank Sheikh Nuruddeen Lemu for the insight he gives into the Islamic perspective, and the scholarship he brings, and the way that he simplifies it, that everybody can understand, is very engaging. I also want to appreciate you for your interfaith spirit and interfaith collaboration. You're always there in Christian spaces all over the world, you know, sharing. That is an example of how the people of different faiths, you know, in this country, especially here where religion is such a divisive thing, it's manipulated. You know, it's a shining example of what can be done. And actually, I'll thank Father George again here for being the one that you know, helped to make us appreciate and know the work that you are doing, to be able to work with you. I want to thank Mr. Omagbitse and Chichi for something that is very profound that you contributed to this discussion. I think the first, Father George, I think also mentioned it, emphasized it, and Chichi herself. The fact that we are all responsible and we all should hold ourselves accountable and not point fingers, you know, or expect that only religious leaders will do that. I think that is something that is very powerful, that should shape the conversations that we have going forward and how we engage citizens and our different communities and congregation, to keep letting people know that agency on the part of every citizen, it's important. This is not a problem that somebody else is going to solve for you, but this is a problem that we should all be solving. Chichi, I thank you as usual, you know, for your insightful conversation. I mean, it's always a joy for me. You and I go way back on these issues. You put something out there that I'm hoping that we will take away with us. And that is the sense of who we are and history and where we are coming from. And I think Father George also reiterated that point that you made. I mean, I remember this song by Bob Marley. You know, we talked about the role, I think it was Mr. Opishe that talked about the entertainment industry, and you also talked about Bob Marley, that we used to say, oh, when we were growing up as young people, we heard that song. Don't forget your history, know your destiny. In the abundance of water, the fool is thirsty. I mean, you just let us know to go back to our cultural identity. And you talked about the constructs and the need to deconstruct everything we need to deconstruct and begin to reconstruct, you know, who we are, what are our African values and our traditional values, and dispel some of the myths and the false narratives that are going around there about who we are. So thank you so much for everything that you have contributed. On behalf of myself, I say thank you. I don't know if Father George wants to say something as the co-organizer before we sign off the meeting. No, okay. So we have to call it a day, sadly. So thank you everyone for participating. God bless you, and have a fulfilling weekend. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye.
Nuruddeen, well done.
You too, thank you.
Yeah.
Omagbitse, pleasure meeting you again.
Thank you very much. Nice meeting you again.
Thank you, Ngozi.
Okay, all right.
All right, my pleasure.
We continue the conversation.
God bless. Dr. Chichi, thank you.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
So that's what